In 2017, Drug Enforcement Administration agents following the money from cocaine deals in Memphis, Tennessee, identified a mysterious figure in Mexico entrusted by drug lords with their millions, a Chinese-American gangster named Xizhi Li. Li had a better way to address a problem that has long bedeviled the world's drug lords: how to turn all of grimy 20s and hundreds amassed on U.S. streets into legitimate fortunes they can spend on yachts, mansions, weapons, technology, and bribes to police and politicians. DEA agents tracked Li's activity across the Americas and Asia. They realized he wasn't just another money launderer, he was a pioneer. Operating with the acumen of a financier and the tradecraft of a spy, he had helped devise an innovative system that revolutionized the drug underworld and fortified the cartels. For years, the Mexican cartels that supply the U.S. market with cocaine, heroin, and fentanyl smuggled truckloads of bulk cash to Mexico, where they used banks and exchange houses to move the money into the financial system. And they also hired middlemen, often Colombian or Lebanese specialists who charged as much as 18 cents on the dollar to launder their billions. Doing business this way was costly, took weeks or even months, and exposed the stockpiles of cash to damage, robbery, and confiscation. Li's operation, federal anti-drug agents in Chicago trailed cartel operatives transporting drug cash to a new destination, Chinatown. Agents watched as cartel operatives delivered suitcases of cash to Chinese mules directed by the top guy, Li. Exchanges took place in motels and parking lots. The mules didn't have criminal records or carry guns. They were students, waiters, drivers. Neither side spoke much English, so they used a prearranged signal, a photo of a serial number on a dollar bill. The mules alerted their Chinese bosses in Mexico, who quickly sent pesos to the bank accounts or safe houses of Mexican drug lords. Li then executed a chain of transactions through China, the United States, and Latin America to launder the dollars. His powerful international connections made his service cheap, fast, and efficient. He even guaranteed free replacement of cartel cash lost in transit. Li and his fellow Chinese money launderers took over the game. Drug lords wanting to get rid of dollars, and a Chinese elite desperate to acquire dollars. The new model blew away the competition. At 35, Li stood 5'7" and weighed about 135 pounds. But he was imposing. He spoke fluent Mexican accented Spanish, wore a Rolex, and emanated menace. He had 2 children with his Mexican-American wife, whose family had useful cartel connections, according to interviews and court documents. In Li's earlier days, he encountered Polanco, a California anti-drug agent. Polanco had spent weeks undercover stalking Li, who was looking for a high-volume supplier. But the guy was a ghost. He used multiple phones. He hid behind intermediaries. Finally, he agreed to meet Polanco at a Denny's by the Pomona Freeway. At the meeting, Polanco introduced himself as Alfredo, a corrupt customs and border protection officer with access to cocaine. He sat down with Li's 25-year-old Mexican-American wife and her brother. During a second meeting at a seafood restaurant, Li told Polanco that he was smuggling 30-kilogram loads of cocaine through Mexico to Hong Kong, making $60,000 a kilogram. He also sent cocaine to Canada, and he had a sideline smuggling Chinese migrants through Cuba. After negotiations with the undercover agent, Li agreed to buy an initial 20 kilograms of cocaine. On July 14th, he sent a young Asian man in a Mercedes to a supermarket parking lot to deliver $200,000. Polanco's team captured the bagman and other accomplices. The bagman, Li's brother-in-law, pleaded guilty to drug trafficking offenses, while charges against the wife were dropped, but Li fled south across the border. In Mexico City, Li rebounded fast. Li met Chiun-Chen only. In her early 20s, she became his romantic and criminal partner, according to court documents. Her charm and intelligence impressed gangsters and cops alike. Chen introduced Li to her own network in the Chinese-Mexican community, including a formidable trafficker known as the Iron Lady. The couple divided their time among luxurious homes in Mexico City, Cancun, and Guatemala, making good money smuggling drugs and migrants. But they saw a new opportunity in money laundering. In 2011, Li went to Guatemala City to buy a casino. Located in a Holiday Inn, Li struck an all-inclusive deal with the owner. He bought his casino license, and his identity. The U.S. fugitive became a Guatemalan gambling entrepreneur, according to court documents. Along the way, Li had developed a complementary racket selling fraudulent documents. Li himself had 5 passports from 3 countries. The fake papers were professionally done. Li infiltrated corrupt Latin American bureaucracies that sell real passports, identity cards, even birth certificates. He also had a government-connected source for passports in Hong Kong. Li charged about $15,000 per document, according to interviews and court files. Stocked with cash and guns, Li's Guatemalan casino became a base of his emerging venture. He started bringing Chinese nationals to the casino, some of them politically connected, others corrupt officials, others expatriates. They mingled with Latin American drug traffickers, the second essential element in his scheme. The casino was a showcase to demonstrate to both sides that Li could deliver. Li deployed dozens of mules from Los Angeles to Atlanta. Just 2 couriers in Chicago picked up more than 10 million from cartel operatives in a 7-month period between 2016 and 2017. If the mules delivered, they collected a 1% fee. If not, they were on the hook. With Li on March 11, 2016, Nebraska state troopers stopped a rental car on a desolate highway. They confiscated $340,000 and released the 2 couriers who were driving from Chicago to Los Angeles. A mule called Li, who called a cartel representative in Mexico and sent a bank transfer to replace the lost load. The courier and his relatives rapidly reimbursed Li by depositing money in U.S. bank accounts. Li's system generally worked like this. Cartel operatives in the United States would arrange a contract with him, often to launder about $350,000, a quantity of cash that fit into a suitcase. Cartel transporters handed over the dollar loads to Li's couriers, who sent Li or his lieutenants a photo confirming the handoff. Li then delivered the sums in Mexican pesos to drug lords from safe houses in Mexico, stocked with that currency. The first stage, providing swift service to the cartels, was complete. Li's profits came from other players in the scheme. Rich Chinese willing to lose money in order to obtain dollars outside China, and Latin American import-export firms needing Chinese currency to do business in China. Li's couriers often drove loads of cash to New York or Los Angeles, which have large Chinese immigrant populations. Li sold the currency to wealthy Chinese clients or their expatriate relatives or representatives. As part of the deal, Li himself would sometimes turn the dollars into deposits in bank accounts or use front companies to issue cashiers checks. The next step in Li's system took place beyond the sight and reach of U.S. authorities. He directed his wealthy clients to transfer equivalent sums from their Chinese bank accounts to accounts he controlled in China. Known as mirror transactions, these transfers enabled Li to sell the same money again, this time as Chinese currency to the Latin American exporters. And there were variations on the system. Li sometimes washed funds through companies owned by Confederates in the United States and Latin America who sold seafood and other goods to China. Taking advantage of the 80 billion in trade between Mexico and China, launderers also sent goods from China to Mexican front companies connected to drug lords. Those companies would sell the products for pesos, creating a legitimate paper trail for money initially earned from the sale of drugs. Li's network used Chinese banks, including the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China and the Agricultural Bank of China. Court documents say things weren't always smooth for Li. In 2016, gunmen ambushed Li near his casino in Guatemala City, shredding his armored Range Rover with more than 20 rounds. He survived unscathed. The attackers got away. Li suspected rival Asian gangsters. According to former investigators, by 2017, Li's empire had grown to span 4 continents. It operated below the radar with startling impunity. A Memphis-based U.S. drug agent was about to change that. Peter Maher teamed up with Xizhi Li, a Tennessee state agent assigned to a federal task force. As they traced drugs on the streets of Memphis back to their source, they discovered that the Sinaloa cartel of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman was supplying cocaine to a major Memphis drug crew. Markings on cocaine packets pointed at Maricela Flores Toruco, now 52, a Mexican drug lord known as the Iron Lady. Maher's team learned that because Flores had a Chinese grandparent, her organization was known as Los Chinos, or the Chinese. Based in Chiapas, she imported tons of cocaine from Colombia for the Sinaloa cartel. Interviews and court documents say soon the agents identified a woman in Mexico who was one of the Iron Lady's principal coordinators of illicit money laundering operations. It was Chen, Li's lover, using the handle China Loa. The agents figured out that Chen had introduced Li to Flores, who encouraged other traffickers to launder their money with his organization. Chen's communications led the DEA to Li, who was laundering for the Sinaloa and Jalisco New Generation cartels. Tracking his U.S. couriers, agents picked off loads across the country. In May 2017, agents arrested one of Li's trusted money managers, a Brooklyn-based mail carrier and Chinese immigrant who had lived in Belize. He recorded about $2 million in illicit transactions in a ledger and sometimes received cash deliveries in his U.S. postal uniform, court documents say. The mail carrier pleaded guilty to conspiracy to launder money and got a 60-month sentence. The Memphis agents toggled between leads in the U.S. and Mexico as the Iron Lady's ferocity kept them on alert. When Flores ordered her enforcers to kidnap the family of a man who owed her money, the agents warned Mexican counterparts. Later, she threatened to kill rivals with a bombing at a racetrack, Xizhi Li said. DEA agents hurriedly obtained an Interpol warrant, and police arrested Flores in Colombia in July 2017. Later that month, the agents captured Chen during a visit to Los Angeles. They seized 5 phones from her along with airline tickets to visit accomplices in Portland, Oregon, who oversaw more than 251 Chinese bank accounts. The next morning, Maher and Xizhi Li drove to the Santa Monica Pier. Sitting in their rental car by the Pacific, they scoured Chen's phones. They hurriedly took screenshots, worried that an accomplice could remotely erase the contents at any moment. Looking at Chen's smartphones, the agents were able for the first time to read the suspect's most sensitive conversations on WeChat. The investigation gathered momentum as the DEA launched Project Sleeping Giant, a campaign against China-connected drug activity. The agents dug through phone data and old cases to find Li's ties to the 14K Triad. The 14K connection also pointed at the Chinese power structure. The Triad's former boss in Macau, Wan Kuokoi, allegedly mixes crime, business, and politics to advance China's interests overseas. In late 2019, Li finally fell, making him think he would meet an associate. The DEA lured him to Merida, Mexico. Mexican federal police captured him and delivered him to DEA agents at the Houston airport, court documents say. He spent 4.5 hours answering questions in English, admitting to financial transactions involving bad money, prosecution documents say. Prosecutors charged him with leading a conspiracy that washed at least 30 million arm, a number backed by direct evidence. The full amount was likely in the hundreds of millions. According to law enforcement documents, Xizhi Li was sentenced to 15 years in prison for leading the conspiracy to launder tens of millions of dollars for foreign drug trafficking organizations. Li signed a consent order of forfeiture for $10,000 to the United States pursuant to his plea. Chen and half a dozen others pleaded guilty and went to prison. Colombia extradited Flores, who pleaded guilty and got 16 years. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. Blessings.